Welcome to our first Green Hat training course. These Green Hat training courses aim to introduce important Levy concepts to all employees so that everyone gains a basic understanding of all Levy company phases of work, important terminology used, and types of equipment used on our projects. We begin our series with underground work. The objectives of this course are to understand the underground phase of work at the Levy company, to understand how it pertains to all other work at the Levy company, to learn the different reasons that the Levy company performs underground work, to understand the skills needed to perform underground work, and to learn the types of equipment used to perform underground work on our projects. So what is underground work specifically at the Levy company? Simply put, underground work at the Levy company is exactly as it states. Any work performed that requires us to install anything below existing ground is underground work. This underground work sets up all facets of heavy highway and even some of our commercial electrical work. Our underground crews are responsible for setting the stage for most of our projects. These employees are responsible for the installation of all components that are buried underground. We will discuss these in more detail in this course. Underground work at the Levy company is critical in all facets of highway work. Currently, Levy underground employees are responsible for installation of drill shaft foundations, which are what a light pole, CCTV pole, sign structure, electrical service, or traffic signal pole are mounted on, traffic signal and traffic management cabinet foundations, installation of various types of ground boxes. You may have heard of the term junction box. A ground box is a junction box in the ground. Underground wasteway installations, which are conduit runs that connect the entire system, and installation of power, communication, and fiber optic cables. The underground installations for commercial and electrical installations are basically the same in principle as highway underground. We may install ground boxes or perhaps a larger vault or manhole, a raceway, a conduit system into the building, and install power, communication, or fiber optic cables. We may install drill shaft foundations for parking lot or walkway lighting as well. It is always important to remember that all of this, street lights, highway lights, traffic signals, traffic management systems, and signage, are critical to ensure the safety of the traveling public. Let's go ahead and get into foundations. There are two types of foundations that we install at the Levy company. These include drill shaft foundations, which are when we drill a hole into the ground at various diameters and at various depths, install a form at the top to install required anchor bolts for what is mounting to the drill shaft, install required conduits, install required grounding, and pour concrete. The second is a cabinet foundation. Cabinet foundations vary in sizes, conduit requirements, and grounding requirements. A traffic signal controller foundation, for example, would include all conduits to operate the entire traffic signal system. This would include a conduit for the controller to receive power from an electrical service source. A traffic management controller would include all conduits for the system in which it is operating, such as a dynamic messaging system controller, and will also require a conduit for the power from an electrical service source. There are various types of foundations that the Levy company installs. They are traffic signal and pedestrian poles, traffic signal controllers, traffic management cabinets, CCTV poles like camera poles, and RVSD poles, which are radars to monitor traffic, roadway illumination poles, high-mast illumination poles, electrical service poles, overhead sign structures like cantilever structures, balance T structures, and overhead sign bridges, and ground mount sign structures. Drill shaft foundations built by Levy company employees vary in size. Sometimes they can be rather small to support small ground mount sign structures or electrical services, and they can often be quite large for high-mast illumination poles, overhead sign structures, and larger traffic signal poles known as long-mast arm poles. The Levy company is equipped to drill up to 60-inch diameter foundations, anything that is 30 to 40 feet in depth. In the event that a foundation is greater in diameter or deeper than that, the Levy company would outsource the drilling of such a foundation to a company with the equipment to support a wider or deeper foundation. These are the most common types of foundations that we install, but other foundations which may be more specialty types could include foundations like communication buildings and transformer pads. In any such case, your supervisor will be overseeing your installations. Our underground crews are also responsible for installing ground boxes. Ground boxes are an important aspect used in underground electrical systems. As mentioned earlier, ground boxes are what help connect the entire underground electrical system. Looking at them like a junction box that is in the ground, they connect all the conduit runs, some of which can be as long as 300 feet and some as short as 3 to 5 feet. Ground boxes, when installed properly, help facilitate the installation of wire and cables over miles and miles of highways and roads. Note, ground boxes may also be used to only shorten a conduit run or when a conduit run changes direction. There are several types of ground boxes and they basically serve the same purpose described above but for many different reasons. The types of ground boxes differ basically on size. These are the typical, but certainly not all, ground boxes that the Levy Company uses. The Levy Company currently uses ground box type A, which is a smaller box of 12 inches wide by 23 inches long and 11 inches deep that we typically use for illumination installations. There is also a ground box type D. This is a larger box at 16 inches wide by 29 inches long and 22 inches deep that is typical for traffic signal installations. Ground boxes for traffic signal systems, typically type D ground boxes, are important installations to properly contain and protect underground wiring and cabling from traffic signal controllers, the traffic signal poles, and to their final destination to the traffic signal and pedestrian signals themselves. Generally, each traffic signal pole would have its own ground box. So if you have a 4-way traffic intersection with a signal pole on each corner, our underground crews will install 4 ground boxes, 1 at each corner, 1 for each traffic light pole. Traffic management systems are a somewhat newer system being used in public transportation, but are becoming more commonplace. These systems require a significant amount of underground work, which includes ground boxes. Fiber optic cables are used in most traffic management systems, but it is very important to note that the equipment also requires power from an electrical service source, which would be installed by Levy underground crews. It's also important to note that fiber optic cables can be an expensive cable to install, especially when they are splicing requirements, and only qualified personnel can and should install and splice fiber optic cables. Roadway illumination systems are often the most basic installations for ground boxes. Conduits originate at an electrical service, go to a ground box where the conduits may change direction, and the conduit system goes from the ground box to light and from light to light, feeding power to every light. In some cases, there may be a ground box installed at every light pole we install. Commercial projects also need underground construction performed. Projects like the current building of the new main campus at Burbank High School need electrical runs underground to run between buildings, which may include ground boxes. For many of our newer commercial builds, underground crews will need to assist and install underground electrical runs. Now we'll talk about conduit installation. For the purposes of this training session, we will focus on specific types of conduit. Though the sizes will vary, these are the main types of conduit installed by the Levy Company. We've got PVC, polyvinyl chloride, Schedule 40 or Schedule 80, HDPE, high-density polyethylene, which is commonly known as roll pipe, and rigid galvanized steel. The Levy Company generally uses 2 methods to install conduit. We can go by trench or open cut, where employees' use of a machine such as a backhoe, excavator, or a trencher to dig into the ground to the required depth installs the conduit run. Or we can use the bore, which is the use of a bore machine to install a conduit. The bore method is normally used in a previously developed area that cannot be disturbed. An example of this is installing conduit under an existing road that is in use. Through boring, we can get underneath that road without damaging it at all. Here are the basic things needed to know in order to install conduit. Firstly, employees need to know the type of material that's going to be installed. As mentioned prior, this can be PVC conduit, which is most common for underground, Schedule 40 or Schedule 80, rigid metal conduit, or HDPE, commonly called rolled pipe. All of the above are determined by size required. 2 and 3 inches are most common. Underground crews will also need to know the required conduit depth. TxDOT standard specification calls for an 18-inch minimum cover over the top of conduit to final grade. Each district has specific requirements for grade, so make sure to refer to project plans and standards. None should be less than 18 inches. Anything under 18 inches would be a special installation and need approval by an engineer. Required backfill is also important. Typical installation can be backfilled with the spoils removed from the trench unless that backfill is not suitable for replacement. An example of this would be if there was a lot of rock removed. The rock in backfill can damage the conduit if put back in the trench and compacted. If that is the case, suitable backfill such as sand will be brought in to backfill. In many cases, there are specific backfill requirements for backfill of conduit that are project specific. These can be sand, flow fill, or concrete encased. Warning tape is also needed. A warning tape will be installed approximately 10 inches above the installed conduit and 10 inches of backfill. The most common type of warning tape is a red plastic 2-inch wide with caution underground electric below on it. There are many circumstances where different types of warning tapes may be required and will be project specific. Examples of different types are detectable warning tapes for fiber optic cables, and warning tapes for communication cables, just to name a few. Your supervisor will direct you on which tape you will need to install. Employees that work in underground construction need a special set of skills in order to complete the work that is required of them. They've got to have an understanding of the equipment that is needed for each project, and they've got to know how to use it. Underground crews also need to know about underground utilities and need to understand the importance of completing utility locates prior to digging. Thorough completion of the ground disturbance checklist is an important tool the Levy Company requires every underground crew to complete prior to beginning any digging. Underground crews need to make sure they are aware of the color coding system that details each type of utility that can be found in the areas that they are digging. Underground crews also need to know how to properly install every item we've mentioned. Ground boxes, cabinets, traffic maintenance systems, and more all require precision and attention to detail. Without proper knowledge and training, improper installations can affect the time and profit on every project. Underground employees also need to know how to properly form foundations, including proper concrete finishing work, and they've got to know how to properly backfill items that have been dug. Along with all of these skills, underground crews need to remember to practice safety first at all times. It's important for underground crews to understand to use the right piece of equipment for each job. Equipment is chosen based on the size of the space that needs to be trenched and the job that needs to be performed. Backhoes and trenchers are used often for areas with smaller trench needs. These pieces of equipment can be used for smaller conduit runs and other small trenching jobs. Drill rigs are also used for underground work. Our drill crews are required to have extensive amounts of experience before they are set out to drill on their own. Remember, Levy Company equipment will only drill foundations up to 60 inches wide and 30 to 40 feet deep. Anything larger than that will be contracted out to ensure correct equipment is used. Vactrons are also used. These units help easily verify utility depths to prevent damage on other lines. These are an important Levy Company tool that help protect all of our employee owner retirement funds. Bobcats are also used by underground crews when it's time to backfill. This list may not include all pieces of equipment that may be used for various underground projects, but it does cover the most used pieces of equipment for every project in underground. Underground crews are responsible for completing all tasks related to underground work. These crews trench areas where a variety of installations need to take place. They must ensure that work is done properly and safety, and they must fill the trenched areas back up once completed properly. This work requires a special set of skills that our employees are thoroughly trained in to complete by their supervisors and requires a great attention to detail. Thank you for viewing this presentation. If you have any questions about underground work or need any additional information, feel free to email us at hr@levycompany.com.